Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Critical Focus channel, where we feature everything related to Warhammer Underworlds, news, reviews, battle reports, painting videos, what have you. We also dip our toes in Kill Team, Aliens, Another Glorious Day in Course, and we have an ongoing campaign for Warhammer Quest Cursed City, so make sure to subscribe, hit the like button on this video, the bell button, and comment the video as well. So let's get cracking with the review of the Universal cards and all the Grand Alliance cards of the Gorechosen of Dromm expansion, which is the last addition to the current season, Warhammer Underworlds Netmaze. And yeah, let's get cracking. First up we have Savage Slaughter. Search hybrid scores immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action that takes the target out of action, if that friendly fighter is a beast or Khorne fighter. So it has an auto-inclusion for all the three Khorne warbands here, Garruk Reavers, the Gorechosen and Magor's Fiends. Wow, very strong card for them. There's just no conditions to fulfill. Or that friendly fighter has no upgrades. So yeah, very strong search for the warbands mentioned. Weighty Blessing, as a mutation, choose one friendly fighter, then put one shield counter on one magic counter on this card. The chosen fighter has -1 move to a minimum of 0 and the following benefit depending on which you picked. Shield, +1. Defense. Magic, the fighter's attack action have cleave. Yeah, so I think you will almost always choose the defense die, and that's very strong. Yeah, +1 defense for the price of a ploy. But yeah, you get -1 move obviously, but I think it's very strong ploy. Last here we have Frenzied Strength. If this fighter is a Khorne fighter, this fighter's range 1 and range 2. Attack actions have cleave, yeah, it's decent. If this fighter is vulnerable, +1 damage to this fighter's range 1 and range 2. It's so rare to be vulnerable, you'll oftentimes just die. So the second effect will not come into play enough for you to include it for that reason. So I think this first part is what you have to work with when you include the card, and that's too weak, so I don't think this is very good. Yeah, you could play it on one of the Garruk Reaver guys with 2 wounds and run through lethal X and get +1 damage, but I think like Savage Strength, Great Strength and Symbiote's Call would do the trick, and more +1 damage card than that is probably not warranted. Alright, let's move over to the other side, and first up for Death we have Mystery of Death, which is an end phase card. It's a hybrid. You can score it in the following ways. Either you have played 4 or more gambits in the preceding action phase. I think you need some card draw for that to be the case, in most cases. Which is certainly doable, but 4 is a bit much, I guess. Or you have scored no other objectives in this round. So that seems good off the bat, because that, I mean, for the same reason that Underdog can be good if you score last, for example, and you scored less cards than the opponent. So the card timing is important, but you can also not have scored any search cards in this round if you are to score it in this way, so I think that just makes it bad. So don't include this card. Next up we have Inevitable Fate, Gambit spell for 1 channel. If cast, choose 1 vulnerable enemy fighter within 4 hexes. Deal 1 damage to that fighter. So the accuracy is good, the range is good, the damage is good, but the fact that the fighter needs to be vulnerable makes it bad. It's too situational, sadly. I mean, your allotment of spells, if you actually take spells, is probably very, very small. So those spells really needs to be very good and very accurate. And this fails in one of those areas. And last up we have Merciless Bludgeon, which is an upgrade for range 1 attack actions that target wounded fighters. And if you target a wounded fighter, you get a reroll, and you also get stagger on your attacks. So stagger is also a reroll, but that happens after they actually get the stagger. So basically you have a reroll against wounded fighters. Most warbands have like a built-in reroll card, and there are like rerolls for standing cover hexes, etc., or for hunters and stuff like that. So maybe this is a bit too weak, because most of the time you will one-shot stuff, or not most of the time, but very often you will one-shot stuff. So having rerolls against wounded fighters, unless you're playing against elites, I think it's too weak. Yeah. Alright, so Destruction. First up we have Whirling Wreckers. 2 glory for a dual end phase card. There are 2 more surviving friendly fighters, and each surviving friendly fighter has 1 or more scything attack actions. Each surviving friendly fighter has 1 or more scything attack actions. Wow, that seems very bad. Oh, first I just read it as 2 fighters need to have scything attacks, but it's actually each surviving friendly fighter needs to have scything attacks. I guess you could build Ripas into having like scything all around, but just ignore this card and move on. Destructions advance. Choose up to 2 friendly fighters, stagger the chosen fighters, and then push the chosen fighters 1 hex towards the closest enemy fighter. So the stagger, it could be bad, but if you mean you can time it in a way that you won't really suffer much from it. If you do it in your last activation, yeah, the stagger tokens will go away at the start of the next round, and you get to push 2 fighters. I think pushing 2 fighters is very strong, and you can set up the Destruction Alliance card for having 2 supporting fighters. Yeah, so I think it's pretty strong. Greedy Swing is 1 range, 2 swords, 2 damage, scything attack, so it's bad attack profile. Yeah, 2 damage is good, but 2 swords is just too bad accuracy for scything attack, given that you have support against you. You also though get the reaction of this attack action. If the target was taken out of action, draw 1 power card. You won't kill much with this upgrade, I'm sorry to say, so it's not a good card. First up we have Shaken Yet Unmoved. Search duel, scores immediately after successful attack action that targeted a friendly fighter if that fighter was not trapped or pushed during that attack action, and that fighter is on the battlefield. So I think for most warbands this is probably not worth taking, because you might get killed or pushed, which is kind of the standard thing to happen after a successful attack. So I think for Storm of Celestis, which has a good amount of wounds and the ability to guard with the Gryph-hound, it should be scoreable with them. So I think for them you might consider it. For the other ones it's probably not worth taking. Next up we have Defend. Choose up to 2 friendly fighters with no move or charge tokens. Give each chosen fighter 1 guard token, then stagger each enemy fighter adjacent to 1 or more chosen fighters. So I mean, most cases you will have 1 fighter eligible for this, so you'll get a guard token and stagger an adjacent enemy fighter. I think it's a bit too situational and hard to get to play, and the fact that you can't have move or charge, I mean, we already have cards that you can just give guard tokens for free without being uncharged or unmoved, and the stagger is not that strong. I don't think it's good enough, this card. Last we have Impervious Charge. While making charge action, this fighter cannot be dealt damage. +1 move while making charge actions if this fighter is a beast. So I think the move part is just crap. Ability not to be dealt damage. It's situational is strong. I mean, so you can't take damage from like Hexbane Hunters, Snapshot shenanigans, but I mean it will very rarely come into effect this first. I think it's just the card as a whole is just too situational for inclusion. So not a lot of strong cards here for orders, sadly. So summing up the Grand Alliance cards, I think Chaos is the winner here when it comes to strong cards, and I don't think that's unwarranted in any way, shape or form. They haven't gotten that many great cards until now, so they badly needed some boost to their card allotment here. So yeah, good for them. Right, so let's start with the universal cards. Let's start with the search cards. Open the Awakened Gate, search duel for 3 glory. Unprecedented amount of glory for a search card. And that scores immediately after an activation step if a friendly penumbral lock gambit is persisting and a friendly fighter has the penumbral key upgrade. When you score this objective, that friendly fighter is taken out of action. So it actually is offset by that. So it's just a 2 glory search, because your opponent will get a glory for the fighter being taken out of action, unless there is a fighter who's not worth any glory, I guess. But yeah, it's very situational. There is only 1 penumbral key, and yeah, it needs to be on a friendly fighter when you score his card. So I would never take it, really, even though it's tempting with 3 glory. Next up is Reel 'em In. Search duel scores immediately after an enemy fighter in enemy territory or no one's territory was pushed, and that enemy fighter ended that push in your territory. So I guess it should be doable. You could score it both in the activation and the power step, so via attack action pushes or via card pushes. So yeah, I mean, for something with knockback or a 2 hex push like Rothgorn's Man Trapper, it should certainly be doable. If it makes the card allotment for searches in a super competitive deck, I'm not sure, but it's definitely worth considering, I think, for some warbands. So the end phases here. Pulled under. Scored this in an end phase if 3 or more domain cards were played. Just check the pile here. There are 4 universal domain cards as a whole, and I mean, not each of them are any good. Or 1 or more enemy fighters who each have 3 or more upgrades or out of action. So banking on an enemy fighter with 3 upgrades being out of action is a bit much. And an end phase card that can't really be reliably scored in the first round shouldn't be taken, is my general consensus. And the 3 domain cards in 1 round seems like a tall order, so this seems a bit hard. So yes, let's move on. Round in circles. 1 glory scores in an end phase if 2 or more scatter abilities were resolved in this round. You could score it with Snurk's scatter ability, the Fanatic, but you could also score it with Grimwatch, and I think that's even more reliable. So they have a ploy to do free Ghoul Call, which has a scatter ability in it, and you could just summon 1 Crypt Ghoul as well with Crack Member if you just keep him safe and way back. So I think it's worth considering in a Grimwatch and possibly a Gitz deck, but I think even more so in Grimwatch. And last here, up to our next scores an end phase if there are more enemy fights in your territory than friendly fighters. It's a bit weakly worded here. Weakly? It's a bit weak in the wording here, but I guess it's supposed to say that there are more enemy fighters in your territory than there are friendly fights in your territory. But yeah, so let's just presuppose that that's what's intended here. So you need to kind of play a defensive warband with not too many fighters to score this reliably, and I'm not really sure at the top of my head what that would be. But I'm sure there's a case for this card in certain warbands. So you need to have a warband with few fighters. So let's just consider something at the top of my head. So let's consider like Iron Soul Condemners. They want to go forward, so they won't really stay in your territory. Maybe you're meeting something that needs to come to you. Then I mean, it should be scoreable. It's just there are variables in this that you can't control yourself, because you might just meet a defensive warband that stays behind as well. So don't really like cards that bank on your opponents doing specific stuff, I guess. So yeah, a bit unsure about this, and it's just 1 glory, so I bet you could find better stuff. And we also have a third end phase card here, Beating the Odds. Score this in the third end phase if there are 1 or more surviving friendly minions, or there are 2 more surviving friendly fighters with no wound counters. So this should be scoreable with something like Gitz, I guess. Several minions, and I mean, but I think especially for something like the Exile Dead, I mean, you can just bring back minions, or even like Season 1 Skavens. This should be very easy to do with them. I mean, once you bring them back, they have no wound counter, so just seems like an outer score, but it's a third end phase, and it's just 2 glory, so you might not make the cut for so few glory in the third end phase. But otherwise it's pretty easy to score. Alright, so Ploys. First up we have Corrupted Companion. Choose 1 friendly fighter, deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter, plus 2 dice to the first attack action made by the chosen fighter in the next activation step. If the chosen fighter is a companion, plus 1 damage to the first range 1 or range 2 attack action made by the chosen fighter in the next activation step. So I guess that means that if you are a companion you get both effects. So that's pretty good. I mean, I think dealing 1 damage to a fighter in a large warband to get plus 2 dice is pretty good without that additional effect. So that's I like this card a lot. Next up we have Dark Water Draught. Choose 1 friendly fighter or choose 1 enemy fighter adjacent to 1 or more friendly fighters, then roll 3 magic dice. For each roll of focus, deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter. For each roll of channel, heal 1 the chosen fighter. It's too random an effect, and you might actually just end up helping your opponent, so not really a fan. Depth Charging. Plus, it's domain card, +1 move to friendly fights, move actions that end in enemy or no one's territory. This effect persists until the end of the round or until another domain gambit is played. So, yeah, +1 move to fighters. Not to every move action, but to a lot of them. It's pretty good. I mean, we have like cycle ploys that do the same. We have asterism that do the same. So, I mean, it's pretty good. And especially for a warband that can move several fighters in one go. Like the Exiled Dead, for example, will make good mileage out of this card. Let's move on. Next up we have Grip of the Drowned. Domain, a fighter cannot be pushed if that fighter is adjacent to one or more fighters. This effect persists until the end of the round or until another domain gambit is played. I mean, it affects both friend and foe, so just be wary that you also hinder yourself from pushing. So, yeah, I'm a bit dubious about this card. Hold them under, choose one enemy fighter and roll X attack dice, where X is the number of friendly fights adjacent to that enemy fighter, to a maximum of 3. For each roll of hammer, deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter. So it's a bit too random and too situational for me. Yeah, I mean, it's tempting to potentially do 3 damage, but you might as well do just 0 damage. And yeah, I think there's are better ploys that are more reliable and stronger. Parting the Waters, friendly fighter, and this is restricted to priest, so that is at the top of my head like Xixitaka, the new leader for the Dromm is a priest as well, I think, and Morgwaith is also a priest. Friendly fighters' characteristics cannot be reduced in the next activation step. Okay. So you need a priest alive to play the card. I think it's way too situational, and it's just for 1 activation, so no. Pretty weak. Really weak, actually. Raging Torrent is the last gambit here, or ploy. It's a reaction, plays after the main gambit is played. Choose an enemy fighter that's holding an objective. Pick one of the chosen fighter's upgrades and break that card. I'm not really a fan of these domain cards, and it's also only on an enemy fighter holding an objective, and that's not really something you do a lot these days, so no. That sums up the ploys. So, summing it up, I really liked the Corrupting Touch, and Depth Charging was also pretty decent. So, other than that, it was pretty bad. Not really super impressed with these cards. Right, so let's take a look at the upgrades. Cursed Boarding Axe is a good attack action upgrade. 2 range, 4 swords, 2 damage. Pretty decent all over the board there. 2 range is great, 4 swords is great, 2 damage is nothing to scoff at. And as all of the cursed weapons, you can't gain unspent glory unless you're on a feature token, but that's also pretty easy to set up, and it's not a big deal if you get spent glory anyway. So it's a good attack action upgrade for any warband that needs an attack action upgrade. Next up we have a priest specific upgrade, -1 wounds. You can do the reaction during an enemy fight's attack action that targets fighter. You can roll 2 magic dice, and you get -1 damage for each roll of focus, though. So you actually sacrifice 1 wound to potentially reduce damage, but not surefire reduce damage. So in the very best scenario you can go +1 with this card, but I don't like it. Next up we have Dark Parasites, +1 damage to enemy fights range 1 attack action that target this fighter. That's obviously not good, but you get +1 damage and Grievous to this fight's range 1 and 2 attack actions. That's a very good offset. I think, I mean, especially for like larger warband that doesn't really care about their own fighters dying, this is a great aggro card. Ow. Really good. And the damage boost to enemy fights is only for range 1. So next up we have a Methalith card, Darkwater Whirlstone. When a fighter within 3 hexes of this fighter is pushed, that fighter cannot end that push further from this fighter. Could be strong in the right circumstance, but a little too situational for my taste, I guess. Lacerating Barnacles, domain card. Reaction, after an enemy fighter ends a move action adjacent to this fighter, roll 1 magic dice or 2 if there was a domain card, a gambit played in this round. If you roll 1 or more focus hexes, you can deal 1 damage to that enemy fighter. I don't think it's good enough, and it's very random. Puzzling map fragment. Action: scatter 3 from this fighter's hex and push this fighter up to 3 hexes along the chain to the end hex. If the chain is interrupted or this fighter will be pushed into a hex that is blocked or occupied, do not push them any further. After resolving the scatter, if this fighter is on an objective token, gain 1 spent glory and break this card. So you need to be on an objective token after the scatter, and you most likely will just be on a gloom. I mean, that's not very good, is it? And it just follows suit as to every other map fragment as being atrociously bad. I'm puzzled. And last of the upgrades and last of the cards in this expansion, we have Shoulder Charge. Reaction of this fighter makes a move action that's not part of a super action, so no charges. Choose 1 enemy fighter, push the chosen 1 hex or 2 hexes if this fight's a brawler. So I guess this could be interesting for Warband that can do a lot of move actions in one go, but I mean, the main contenders would be the XL, but this is a reaction, and reactions can't be used during the daintal stance or whatever it's called. So that disqualifies them, and I'm not really seeing what other warbands could make a lot of use out of this card, so I wouldn't include it. So that sums it all up, and yeah, we had some decent ploys, a couple of good upgrades. We had, especially for Chaos then, a good couple of cards for them in the Grand Alliance allotment as well. So if you have enjoyed this review, please make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and hit the bell button, all that jazz. Take care, and yeah, have a nice day. Bye.